Founded in 1974 by former Marvel publisher Martin Goodman, Atlas Seaboard was a comics company built not on ideas, but on the concept of payback. The story is this. When Goodman sold Marvel to Perfect Film and Chemical Corporation in 1968, he was essentially laying the groundwork for his retirement. After all, he had been publishing comics for nearly 30 years. The founder of Timely Publications, Goodman enjoyed early success thanks to breakout characters like the Submariner, the Human Torch, and Captain America. Once the war had ended and superheroics began to wane in popularity, Timely began the practice of emulating whatever trends were currently popular, leading the company to produce westerns, romance, and even teen humor. Goodman had kept his company small to keep his profits high. In spite of its huge newsstand presence, Timely actually only consisted of writer Joe Simon, his artist partner Jack Kirby, and inker Sid Shores, along with Goodman's wannabe novelist nephew Stanley Lieber, Timely's office boy, copyist, and eventually sole editor. After a business dispute, Simon and Kirby left the company, leaving Lieber essentially in charge of Timely's destiny. Unfortunately, the editor was in a rut. Years of aping the competition had dulled his creative edge, leaving him directionless and uninspired. By the 1950s, Timely was rebranded Atlas Comics. Under that moniker, the company limped on with its line of knockoffs and imitations. By the 1960s, its major focus was now gigantic but Comics Code-friendly monsters with names like Sprag, Orgo the Unconquerable, and Timbu Ba. By this time, Jack Kirby had returned to the company to join more recent hires like Don Heck, Joe Maneely, and Steve Ditko. Meanwhile, Stanley Lieber was calling himself Stan Lee and eyeing a life outside of the company he had spent 20 years driving. It was a directive from his uncle Martin to chase the latest trend yet again, emulating the success of DC's revived superhero line that led to Lee partnering with longtime collaborator Jack Kirby to produce the first issue of the Fantastic Four. The book's success was an encouraging sign, and soon the newly rebranded Marvel Comics were bursting at the seams with such enigmatically named characters as Cyclops, Daredevil, and Spider-Man. Thanks to this new approach, Marvel was soon seeing record sales. Unfortunately, the creation of new titles was limited by a restrictive distribution arrangement Goodman had been forced to make with Independent News some years previous. Editor Lee worked around this by taking Marvel's anthology books and splitting them between two newly popular characters. This saw fellow Avengers Captain America and Iron Man sharing tales of suspense, as well as more unlikely team-ups like the recently revived Namor the Submariner alongside the rampaging Hulk. Instead of watering down their characters' appeal, Marvel's 2-in-1 books instead created the beginnings of a multifaceted universe that would go on to surpass its primary competitor, DC Comics, by 1972. Thanks to the company's newfound clout at the newsstand, Marvel was now able to publish as many titles as it wanted, splitting the previously shared books up to give many of their most popular characters their own titles. Comfortable with this measure of success, Goldman sold the company in 1968, although he retained his position as publisher until 1972. He did this with the caveat that his son Chip assume his role as publisher, but Marvel's new owner, Perfect Film and Chemical Corporation, had other ideas. Perfect felt that Marvel's current success and identity was the result of Stan Lee, and wished to keep Lee happy. Chip was fired, and Lee was made publisher, which clearly pissed Goodman off to no end. This was a slap in the face, and he wasn't about to walk away without getting some recompense. In spite of his wealth, success, and freshly retired status, Goodman set about once again building a comic company from the ground up. Officially titled Seaboard Publications, for this venture Goodman resumed his old Atlas Comics moniker, although it quickly became known as Vengeance Incorporated for the way Goodman relentlessly went after Marvel. He shamelessly aped his former company's trade dress and aesthetic, along with its hip attitude and language. Even bolder, Goodman shamelessly poached Marvel creators, including Stan Lee's own brother, Larry Lieber. But who could resist? Goodman was offering heretofore unheard-of perks for working for this new company. Unlike the Big Two, creators at Atlas would retain the rights to their creations. Artists would get their original pages back instead of having this potentially valuable material stockpiled by a work-for-hire company that treated them as disposable assets. Writers would own their own concepts and be free to take these properties elsewhere should circumstances dictate. Goodman hired former Warren Publishing creator Jeff Roven to oversee Atlas's monthly comics, while the aforementioned Larry Lieber was put in charge of the magazine division. The company's output was so closely modeled on Marvel that it's a wonder copyright charges weren't filed, but one gets the sense there was a real Mexican standoff sort of thing happening here. Instead of Goodman taking legal recourse, he would instead subjugate and humiliate his former company. It was a bold move, the sort made by players who set the very rules for the game. Unfortunately for Goodman, the game had changed. The new Atlas started off strong. Trade papers buzzed with news of this upstart company taking aim at dethroning Marvel, and Atlas wasn't shy about making its intentions known. The company had a bold strategy, with 23 titles planned for 1974. Offering some of the highest rates in the industry at the time, Atlas landed work from such heavyweights as Neil Adams, Alex Toth, Frank Thorne, Russ Heath, and the aforementioned Wally Wood, along with visionary new creators like Rick Butler and Howard Chaykin, in addition to landing a plethora of new work from the now legendary Steve Ditko, whose loss Marvel constantly lamented publicly in its Bullpen's bulletin page. The previously discarded Chip Goodman was ostensibly in charge of Atlas, but his talents seemed to lie more along the lines of managing gentlemen's magazines, and he had little real influence. Atlas busied itself with comics, and Martin returned to his old dictatorial ways. Not content to simply raid Marvel for talent, Goodman chose to steal his former company's ideas as well. If he could no longer publish The Amazing Spider-Man, The Incredible Hulk, or Conan the Barbarian, then Goodman would publish The Tarantula, The Brute, or Wolf the Barbarian instead. The characters were just different enough to avoid litigation, while similar enough that the publisher's intent could not be missed. Goodman also sought inspiration from popular films like Planet of the Apes, Enter the Dragon, and Death Wish, as well as television shows like Kung Fu and Kolchak the Night Stalker. The rest of the Atlas line would be padded out with genre evergreens like war, horror, western, and Archie teen-style humor comics. The content beneath the covers was another matter entirely. The quality varied from title to title, and often from issue to issue, with some strong books out of the gate, some junk, and a bunch of so-so products stuck squarely in the middle. And it wasn't that those books were bad, but Goodman was never going to dethrone Marvel, publishing stuff like Police Action featuring Lomax. The sales numbers reflected this grim reality soon enough. In spite of an initially positive industry buzz, a stable of top-notch creators, and Goodman's own lifetime of experience as a publisher, his books were falling flat. That is, when they were not outright returned. Marvel wasn't about to take this Atlas business lying down. Stan Lee made it clear that any creators who chose to defect would not be rehired by the company. Marvel also flooded the market with reprint titles, forcing the smaller Atlas off the stands. There were also rumors that the company was using its influence to quash its competition, although these remain mainly unsubstantiated. When it became clear that the line was stiffing, many news agents sent their unopened bundles of Atlas books directly back to their distributors for credit. The books were then stripped of their covers and bundled 3 for $0.25, selling through drug and grocery stores. This drove faltering sales straight into the ground. Desperate to steer his company into more profitable waters, in the spring of '75, Goodman implemented what would become known as the third issue switch. Convinced his books would sell better if they were more like Marvel, Goodman scrapped storylines and entire creative teams overnight, demanding his once well-courted creators rework their characters and storylines to more closely resemble the competition. For most books, this occurred with the third issue, irritating creators and confusing readers alike. Howard Chaykin's swashbuckling Scorpion got a superhero makeover and a hearty dose of Marvel-style self-loathing, while the wonderfully weird Morlock 2000 was made an ensemble book by killing the title character off and introducing a crew of interchangeable mutant Midnight Men. Other books were simply cancelled, so if you were one of the 12 people who cared about what happened to Man Monster, well, you're still wondering 40 years later. Atlas was unable to stop the bleeding, and eventually Goodman decided to throw in the towel on Vengeance Incorporated. The entirety of the Atlas comic line was abruptly cancelled in late summer of 1975. By the end of the year, Atlas was nothing but a memory. All that remained of the final Goodman empire was a sleazy gentleman's magazine called Swank, which the erstwhile Chip edited until his death at the age of 55. Martin himself retired to Florida, passing away quietly in the late 1980s. Creators like Chaykin and Buckler were able to repurpose their concepts, the Scorpion and Demon Hunter, for Marvel as Dominic Fortune and the Devil Slayer, respectively. As for the others, aside from a short-lived attempt in 2011 to revive the line, Atlas has remained a dollar bin curiosity, a bit of trivia for the diehards. That is, at least until the recent news that Paramount Pictures was in talks to bring these long-dormant creations back as feature films. Will this latest attempt at an Atlas relaunch succeed? Stay tuned. I'm Jason Mink for the Old Guys Who Like Old Comics Network, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider contributing to our GoFundMe. Even a few bucks goes a long way in generating the kind of content you want to see. Thanks a lot.